Welcome, everybody, and thank you for participating. This is the first and inaugural edition of the E for Impact International Mentoring Program, which we have subtitled, The First 5 Years. It's all about the first 5 years of your business. My name is Frank Cinque. Many of you, you're familiar with me. I am the General Manager of the E for Impact Foundation. We set up this series of webinars thanks to a suggestion from our first guest, Dr. Angelo Moratti. And this is specifically for alumni and for young entrepreneurs who are in their first 5 years of running a business. And we're going to talk to Dr. Moratti, but also once a month for the next year, we'll be talking to business people who have extensive experience, either funding young businesses or running businesses, who can mentor you through the process, talk about critical areas in your business. You know, the first 5 years of a company are the most crucial. Statistics vary, but it's commonly noted that over 50% of companies fail to reach their 50-year anniversary. What are the characteristics of those companies that overcome this critical period? What are the principal hurdles they face? What can a young entrepreneur do best to guarantee the success of his or her company? Those are the kind of things and issues we'll be facing during this coming year as we talk to successful business people who have faced these hurdles, sometimes also been injured by them, but have overcome them and can share from their life experience how to make it your business succeed. I invite you all, as we talk to Dr. Moratti, to also go to the chat and add any questions or comments that you might have. And we're going to reserve the last 20 minutes of our conversation to the questions that you place via chat. We've also solicited questions as you are signing up for the program. And so those questions will also be part of our conversation. But right now, I'd like to start by introducing Dr. Moratti and just beginning to have him talk about his experience. Dr. Moratti is the founder and chairman of Angel Capital Management and Milan Investment Partners. Mr. Moratti's extensive experience as both an entrepreneur and a venture capital investor. Mr. Moratti founded the telecom company ePlanet, which went public in 2000. He was the founder and former chairman of Sarlux, a company that built and managed an electrical power station with a capacity of 550 megawatts. He's currently also the vice chairman of Saras, the largest oil refinery in the Mediterranean. Welcome, Dr. Moratti.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's first of all, hello everybody. It's an honor and a pleasure to be speaking to you for the next hour. So the first 5 years. So let me start with my entrepreneurial experience that started in 1996 and ended in 2001. And it was the biggest lesson of my life. So in the mid-90s, I went to attend a course at Columbia University. And back in the days, Columbia University was renowned to be one of the best business schools in the world. And it was famous for being very close to the entrepreneurial community, and most of all with Wall Street. And in the 90s, for any European young person like me, being close to Wall Street or being close to major American Europeans, it was a dream for me. So I attended the course, and after that, I went to speak to the dean of Columbia, and I asked him if he could introduce me, not to a renowned entrepreneur, but maybe to a young student who had been there and he thought could have had the characteristic to become an entrepreneur. And he did, and he put me in touch with a young person like me. He had just finished his work at McKinsey in Argentina and had gone back to Milan in Italy and was looking to start his new venture. So when I met him, I asked him, his name was Luigi. I said, what would you like to do and why would you like to start a new venture? And he said, Angelo, the technology is booming. There's so much changing in the world, and there's a big opportunity to start to introduce to big businesses, maybe in this country, And one of them is the opportunity to give them to have incredible discounts on international phone calls. Now, you may remember back in the days, international phone calls were extremely expensive. And why? Because in every country there was one telecom company. In the case of Italy, it was Telecom Italia. They were a monopoly, and obviously they made most of their money through fixed line and through international phone calls. I mean, one phone call, international would cost up to maybe $2 a minute, and
easily even more.
Yeah, and while, for example, their cost would be 19 cents. I mean, it was ridiculous. So, I mean, this device that just came onto the market, it was an American device, could have been just introduced to corporations. They would have just stick it into their computers, and any phone call done from their corporation would have up to 50% discount. So I obviously, with great pleasure and enthusiasm, accepted the challenge. So we formed a company in 1996. I had just under 30% of the equity, and we started selling the proposition to major corporations. And to tell the truth, the first 2 years, we had some serious problems. So we were regarded as being a company that was too small, not sufficiently experienced, and most of all, we were regarded as being an illegitimate business. When you're used to, obviously,
disruptive,
the state of quo and the disruptor comes, most of the times, I mean, it's too good to be true. So you have to be legitimate. So it took us 2 years to gain the confidence of some of the major corporations in the country. And 2 years later, 1998, we were awarded the first national license for an Italian telecom company, because the government opened up the telecom market. And so we were the first independent telecom company in Italy after Telecom Italia. And obviously, after us, there have been many after us, but we were the ones that took the opportunity first. Okay. The moment we got that national license, our profile changed, and we obviously were trusted more by clients. Great managers wanted to come and work for us, and I will always, that's a great lesson that I will never forget. Always hire people that are smarter than you are. Mm-hmm. And by the beginning of 1999, we were approached by a few international banks, and one of them was Morgan Stanley. So Morgan Stanley invited us to their offices in London. They saw our numbers, they saw the state of our company, and then they said, listen, guys, if you do the right thing, within the next year, your company could be taken public and could be worth up to 100 million euros, which for us was like, wow, that was incredible. So 2 months later, they came back. They actually came to Italy and said, sorry, guys, we were wrong. The business plan is still the same, but the valuation is not 200, it's 100, it's $1 billion. So if you do the right thing, the market is changing so much. You can take this company, which at the time, it had like probably 30 or 40 million in revenues, could be having $1 billion valuation. So we obviously realized that there was something huge happening, and we took the risk. So we did a bid among the banks. We chose Goldman Sachs as our bank, because back in the days, Goldman Sachs was the most competent and aggressive bank in the field. And they drew us a roadmap to arrive at the stock market for March 2000. So beginning of 2000, you may remember, it was the internet era.
Yes.
I mean, it was amazing. I did a trip to Silicon Valley, and I remember I went to meet Sequoia, which is the legendary venture capital fund. Then I went to see Internet Capital Group, which was a holding company that had invested in internet company, and it was worth 60 billion. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, it was just going to see another planet. Yeah. I realized, how fast the world was changing. So anyway, we arrived at March of 2000, and just a few days before we were about to go public, a company, an internet company, another company that went public before us, they got caught cheating with their numbers. And so because of that, the Italian stock market closed all the IPOs for innovative companies for 2 months.
Gosh.
And so our IPO was delayed. And when we went back to the authorities 2 months later, it was a different world. So the internet bubble had burst in April 2000. Microsoft shares fell 30%. Most of the internet stocks in America went down drastically, and there was no more opportunities for an internet company to go public. But because we were a telecom company, we still had the opportunity to go public. And that's what we did in August of that year. So on the 4th of August of the year 2000.
So Angelo, you went public during the burst of the bubble.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yes, we managed to go public on the 4th of August on the year 2000. The valuation was cut from 2 billion to 800 million.
Wow.
And originally in March, it could have been up to 3 billion. Now, obviously the numbers of the company were very low, but they were subject to a business plan that was supposed to be fully funded by a loan, which would be provided by Goldman Sachs, which would push the numbers to reflect the valuation in a year time. And so it was obviously paradise for any entrepreneur. You know, me and my partner and all our managers became heroes. And obviously our ego, you know, became bigger. You know, that's what usually happens when you have an incredible success. Little we knew that that success would last very little. 2 months later, the crisis also hit the telecom market. So by October of that year, any telecom company that was listed on any stock market in Western Europe, they lost most of their valuation. Goldman Sachs went back to us and said, listen, guys, the world has changed. By the way, we were going to lend you money to do this business plan. We're not going to do it anymore. We know we signed a contract. Sue us if you want to. We're Goldman Sachs. We don't. We obviously don't. We're not scared about you suing us, but we're not going to found a business plan which has no opportunity to be successful in a world that has dramatically changed since the beginning of the year. So we were faced with only one choice, which was to downsize the business, restructure the company, and have it ready for a possible sale.
Right.
Which is in the end what we did. And obviously everything that was positive until then, so good press, good shareholders impact, became negative. At least once a week there was an article against our company and against any companies that were involved either in telecom or in internet, because the world suddenly turned around us. But we were able, by hiring the right people, to restructure the company, to make it profitable again, and we managed to sell it to 3 funds by May of 2001. Now, the reason why I'm telling you the story is because for me, it has been the greatest lesson that any entrepreneur can go through. So immediate success, but then if you obviously build a company with the foundations that are not strong enough, you obviously run into considerably big problems. And again, to take a company public 4 years after the inception, I mean, there are obviously exceptions to the rules, but it's usually very, very hard to be successful for the long term. So this was the greatest lesson that I've had. After that, I obviously realized I needed to, change my mindset, make a further step towards becoming an entrepreneur, find myself in relations to the projects that I wanted to be involved in the future. Also, when you're involved in your first project, you never know really what you're good at. Some entrepreneurs are good at marketing, others are good at products, others are good at vision, others are good at processes. So you need to find your space within the company, and you need to stick to it, and you need to hire the best people that eventually will complete the team. I'm going to stop here if anybody wants to ask some questions.
Angelo, let me ask you a couple of questions just to touch on some points that you very important. Um, first, the question of size, okay? Because one of the elements that maybe made you vulnerable, obviously at that point, you mentioned where Microsoft, fell 30%, but they obviously survived. The smaller companies were not able to make it through the crisis. And I've seen, based on the companies that you've been investing in lately, that one of the things you push for them is to grow as quickly as possible. That small is not beautiful. That you need to become bigger in order to become more productive and to become more stable. Can you tell us a little bit about how you see that?
It's a great question, actually, because once you start a company, the first thing that you need to see is the traction of the product. So the company has to have a sustainable business model. I mean, I'll give an example. We have lately invested in a company that builds restaurants. And we invested actually right after they had just opened their first restaurant. But when we went to analyze the number of that restaurant, the numbers were so good and the product had so much traction, in that case was for students, that we realized that only that restaurant could be indicative for a future growth. And we were actually right. So usually, it's not actually the size of the company, but it is the traction that the product has towards its customers. Obviously, if you go and invest into a software company, it's a totally different game. Because if you go and invest in a software company, you can go for 4 or 5 years without any revenues. And so it's a totally different game. So you have to be a lot more technical there, and the risks are a lot higher. Back in the days, in the 90s, all these parameters were out of the roof. They didn't matter anymore. Because everything was new and the excitement was so high, obviously things didn't add up anymore. But that situation usually doesn't add up, for a few years. In that respect, it lasted 5 years from the Netscape IPO in 1995 to April of 2000. That was the internet bubble.
Exactly.
Now, you may think that now there's a technology bubble that probably lasted a year ago, since the inception of the pandemic. And the use of SPACs right now is an indication of that bubble. There probably is, but to tell you the truth, it has already started to fall down because you're starting to see the first indication of the big companies. I totally agree with you, though, that size absolutely in the end matters. Because in the end, if you are bigger and strong, when the storm arrives, you have a lot more possibilities to survive.
Exactly. And that's one of a key indicator for someone who's in that first 5 years, is to be looking at their business traction and using that traction to be able to grow and to structure. And talking about structuring, just the other thing that you mentioned, when you see the enthusiastic entrepreneur who's got a great idea, who's able to make those, the first initial relationships, get some initial funding. But the idea of the team becomes so much more important in order to be able to structure, because that the enthusiasm of the entrepreneur is only going to take him so far, correct? So tell us about that in terms of building a team and managing a team, of what that meant for you.
Well, a company starts with people, and a company is usually successful because of the quality of its people. And I'm actually not the best at talking about this, but I can give you the example of the best entrepreneur probably in the history of time, which has been Steve Jobs. Yeah. If you speak to Bill Gates will tell you that Steve Jobs was incredible at choosing people. The ability of Steve in choosing the best team and be surrounded by people that made Apple the most incredible company in the world was absolutely exceptional. And for somebody like Bill Gates, who's a champ, he said, I'm not as good as Steve Jobs. So if you go to America, the mantra is, you need to hire people that are smarter than you are.
Right.
Most of the most of the great entrepreneurs will tell you that, and they usually are successful because of that. But if you go and analyze all the best companies, from Microsoft to Google, I mean, Google is another great example. I mean, they're really great at hiring people. Facebook, the same thing. Airbnb and Uber, they have been great at hiring and attracting always the best people.
Okay, thank you. But another lesson from your life is that you mentioned to me on a couple of occasions is the idea of when you, after you'd gone through this period, you went out and looked for a mentor. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Now, having the right mentor, I think, is the essence for your success. And again, you need to choose your mentor according to your personality and according to your dreams. For example, if I had chosen Steve Jobs as my mentor, it would have been a disaster because I'm not an aspiring Steve Jobs. I don't have the Steve Jobs character. I don't have the aggressiveness that he has, that he had, and the creativity that he had. For example, when I was working for ePlanet and growing the telecom company, the more the days passed by, and the more I realized that I was more of an investor and more of a vision person than actually a process person. My partner was to do with processes. He was running the company.
Right.
I was coming to the offices and giving him the vision. I was bringing the prospective partner or the prospective manager.
Right.
So I was the venture capitalist. Right. So as I realized that, obviously I started reading books that were written on Warren Buffett, because Warren Buffett was the greatest investor at the time. And when you have a dream, if you keep it long enough, usually it becomes a reality. The best way to predict the future is to create it. And I actually managed to meet Warren in 2001. And then I invited him to Italy because he was promoting one of his companies. And I organized a dinner for him with 50 entrepreneurs. And at the end of the dinner, he told me, Angelo, would you like to become my eyes and ears in Europe for me? Whoa. And that was again another dream that was being fulfilled. And since then, 2001, I've been traveling to Omaha at least 4 times a year and interacting with Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett to bring them opportunities that can come from this continent. That changed my mindset because understanding and see how Warren behaves when he works, was crucial for me to adapt myself within my own projects.
Beautiful.
So there's another thing. One of the first discussions that I had with Warren, he told me, Angelo, first of all, don't try to become Warren. Try to find Angelo. Okay. Because if you find Angelo, you will be a lot more successful than trying to emulate Warren. Everybody's got their own story. It doesn't matter that somebody else's story is bigger than somebody else's. Each story is incredible and extraordinary. You just have to find yours.
Excellent. So this is fascinating because what you're saying is first, you find your role within the company, even if you're the entrepreneur, even if the idea was yours and you started the company. As you're working to make it grow, you have to understand what you're best suited for. What is your true strength? Then once you've identified that, go out and look for an entrepreneur. Go out and look for someone who's been successful in doing precisely that, and try to build that relationship with him and create that role of mentorship. But at the same time, don't get stuck into the thought of you need to imitate what they wear and where they buy their eyeglasses and things. You be yourself, but that mentorship relationship is key to help you to develop that. Excellent. Okay, very good. Let's just take a few questions, okay, that we've received prior to the event, and these are people that wrote as they were signing in for the event. And Fred Kararanga from Rwanda asked, what is the one thing that you need to monitor in the first 5 years of your business start?
I think that there's 2 things. First one is strength of the team, and keeping the team focused with a common objective. That's the most important thing. And the second one is I was already mentioned before, is understanding whether the product that you are pushing into the market has the same traction that you thought when you actually conceived it. So, the team has to be totally cohesive and focused on the objective. And but the product obviously has to have attraction. You have to have both things.
Excellent. So cohesive team and a product that has traction. Very good. Philip Emmanuel from Ghana asks, what is the best way to keep your business growing? He's someone who's had success at the beginning, but needs to make the business scale and needs to have it continue to grow to reach those dimensions which will make it solid and which will make it more and more viable in the future.
Yes, and here's another one. With our fund in Italy, we've invested in 2 companies, and they pretty much sell the same product, except that one company has invested very little in digital and has hired very mediocre managers within their company to obviously try to sell their product online. The other company, as opposed, has invested a lot in digital, and they have attracted possibly the best managers in the country.
Wow.
And you see the incredible difference there. The company that has invested and hired the best people is growing at 90% a year. The other company is growing at 26% a year. So that is the difference. So you need to hire the best people within your own category. And if you're able to do that, that's what makes the difference.
Okay. And in order to do that for a startup, I think we're going to have to be able to attract investors, but we'll get into that in the next section. But okay, that's so hiring the best people, not mediocre people, especially in that which is your core expertise in the business, is what's going to drive the growth of that business. That's excellent. Okay. Another question from Rwanda, Jean Bosco Mugabe. How can you ensure that your business that has a moderate to low level of customers in the first 5 years will still be able to expand?
I would say definitely creativity and innovation. I mean, there's being involved in a startup is is an exciting thing. But if you think about it, it's a nightmare. I mean, because you're working 24 hours a day. Your job eventually goes into your family life.
Exactly.
And you have an emergency every day. So those are kind of the negative things. But at the same time, there's a level of creativity within your daily work that is incredible. And if you keep that level of creativity, which is the essence of solving the major emergencies every day, then you have won. I mean, I remember I was talking to an entrepreneur in England a few years ago, and he was telling me, Angelo, I go through phases. I'm either super creative, and then I have to stop and become relentless. So it's the ability to never give up, but at the same time, I need to retain the ability to be creative. So they're almost the opposite of each other, but you need to allow these two different pieces to coexist together.
Right. To be creative and relentless together. Yes, that's it. But just to stay on that thought for just 1 second, because it goes very well together with 2 other things that you mentioned. One, hire people that are smarter than you. And the other element that you talked about is the fast growth rate that came from hiring, the best digital managers you could find in the country. If you're continually dialoguing with this type of person, the entrepreneur, the one who has the vision, is going to have fertile ground to be creative. He's going to have a lot of input coming back from him, from his team.
I'll tell you a fantastic story. we are very close as a group with a company that is legendary to me. It's called Starbucks.
Yeah, sure.
So Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, came to Milan in 2006, and I actually became very close to him. And I actually convinced him to start Starbucks in Italy.
Oh my God.
And we co-invested together in a bakery concept here in Milan, and we're now taking it all over the world. So I became very close with Starbucks. And the winning application for Starbucks was a product which was invented by a bartender in California, and it's called Frappuccino.
Frappuccino, sure, of course.
Frappuccino was not invented neither by Howard Schultz nor by his managers. It was invented by the ultimate, the last employee at Starbucks somewhere in California.
My God.
But the reason why this happened is because Howard, from the start, he developed a company where everybody that was involved actually counted. You know, everybody had stock options, everybody had a say, and everybody was important. And that gave enough confidence to everybody that went to work at Starbucks to bring their creativity inside the company.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that. Frappuccino is an amazing product. I mean, when I brought my boys to the States, they loved it. Frappuccino is something. That's great. Okay, beautiful. And now, last question. We're gonna move with this question towards your experience as an investor, because we want to make sure we underline that, and you can give some advice in terms of people who are looking for investors. But this is someone from Eswatini who asks, capital injection. He says, is it advisable to sell off your family assets to begin to raise capital or to raise more capital? Tough question.
Absolutely not.
No. Oh, okay.
Absolutely not. Because I start from the premises that family always comes first.
Okay.
And I mean, if you are doing even great in your company, but you're using family assets, then you go home and everybody's worried, and your wife.
Yes. Right.
I think quality of life is of essence during an entrepreneurial activity. And behind every great entrepreneur, there's a great, wife, there's a great woman. And so, no, I would keep the two things separate, actually.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. So let's move toward more, put on the investor's vest, if you would. Okay. And just to give maybe tell a story too about a couple of decisions that you made, who you rejected and who you've accepted. And just to give an idea of how does an investor approach companies in their third or fourth year who are showing promise, but who need to take the next step and need that infusion of capital?
Yes. Well, first of all, the investor has got a very unique DNA. So the investor needs to have a lot of patience. The investor needs to be wise. The investor needs to understand people very well. So he needs to know about psychology. And the investor needs to, in a way, understand what will happen in the future. And most of all, the investor needs to manage risk. Right. Because at the base of that, when you take an investment decision, risk is the most important factor. So along this investment world, let's start from the seed ventures.
Okay.
When you invest in somebody that has an idea, so it's always from an investor point of view, invest in somebody that maybe has an idea, but that idea either has some sort of experiential,
foundation,
foundation or a proof that works, or the risk just becomes too high. Sure. If going to the very, very high risk from the investor point of view, there's a way to invest in ideas, and it's called Silicon Valley, it's called the spray and pray. So when you invest in 100 companies across prospective entrepreneurs, and you hope that out of 100 investments, obviously little tickets, at least 2 or 3 would be successful. Those 2 or 3 will repay everything else.
Right.
Now, Silicon Valley is great at that. And again, the idea of having a mentor, although I was very good at attracting Warren and becoming good friends with Warren, when it comes to Silicon Valley, it's a lot more difficult.
Sure.
Because the people that are involved in Silicon Valley are younger, they're a little bit more arrogant. They tend not to share their experience with you, and they tend to think, and in a way they're true, that everything happens there.
Okay.
They don't need anything outside their own world. But they're, in a way, the best at understanding the risk allocation for every phase of the investment. So you have the seed, and they do that game extremely well. So if they do seed investments, they usually put 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, so little tickets, and
right.
Usually out of that 100 or 50 investments, 1 or 2 entrepreneurs come up by chance, and they become the great entrepreneurs of the future. Then you go a little bit up, and there's the venture investments, there's the venture world. So then you go into a phase whereby there is the entrepreneurs who have maybe started the business is up and running, not profitable yet, but there's something good about it, and you can easily understand there that with some capital injection, the business can prospectively become profitable and have attraction, and again go national and then go global in a second phase. So that's the venture. Then there's the growth.
Okay.
Growth is a step further. So the business usually maybe is not yet profitable, but not because the business cannot be profitable, but because the business chooses to invest all the money that they have in the bank for growth, and because their ambition is to conquer the market that they've created. So once they have conquered it, they have no more competition. So I'll give an example. Uber did that. Facebook.
Uber, yes.
They started being profitable when they went public. Before that, they consistently lost money, but they conquered their own market. And once they conquered their own market, any new company, for example, in the case of Facebook, they came up, like Instagram, they bought it. Or like WhatsApp.
Right.
Bought it. Same as Google. When YouTube came up, they bought it.
Right. Exactly.
So that's now the most popular sector within the investment activity right now is growth, because it gives the most gains, the biggest gains, and the fastest gains, obviously. But it is the most difficult game to play, also because the companies that are involved in growth are the most expensive.
Okay.
So where I try to capitalize on this,
exactly.
Again, when you're an investor, you need to be contrarian. So I started from the premise: where is Italy in the venture world? Practically non-existent. Why don't I create the venture environment and ecosystem in Italy, or at least try to help it to create, so that Italy can become prospectively an important hub for the rest of the world, and actually be a presence, an important presence within the international investment community. And to tell the truth, if Italy can do this, any African country can do this. All you need is a few successful entrepreneurs and a good university and the backing of the government. So again, it's the famous ecosystem.
And then, so we're talking about something at that point, long-term, something that our entrepreneurs can look at as a perspective. But let's go back to the judgments you make in terms of, or the trust factor you have with the companies that are in that growth mode. I mean, you mentioned the restaurant, where the single restaurant had such impressive numbers and had a very defined customer base. that you knew that you could replicate that and build it out very quickly. Can you tell us about a company or two that looked good on the surface, but then you didn't invest in, and why not?
Yes, that's a great example. So first of all, me and my team, we always like to invest in companies where we can be of help and add value.
Right.
So we are good at consumer tech. Consumer tech means fashion, food, design, travel, and tourism. And in a way, wellness as well. So in any of those sectors, we actually have a substantial network around us that we can be a lot of help. And so when we contact an entrepreneur, it's not about them begging us for money. It's about us begging them to accept our money.
Okay.
The opposite process.
Right.
And because usually the entrepreneurs that we end up speaking to, they're very confident, and money becomes almost an irrelevant factor. Because if the business traction is good, money suddenly disappears, suddenly appears. In regards to rejections, I'll give you an example. 5 years ago, I went to Silicon Valley. I was introduced to a company called Juicero. It was regarded back in the days as being the most promising company in Silicon Valley. And their aim was to recreate the business of juice in the world. So an ecosystem, with a new machine, a juice machine, actually, which was actually designed by Johnny Ive from Apple, which would practically become the Airbnb and Uber of juice around the world. And which was, to tell the truth, one of the best stories that I ever heard. The problem was that the valuation of the company was 400 million and revenue zero.
Wow.
So they were valuing 400 million a company that had the business
not yet on the market. Yeah.
No. And who had investors? Google Ventures, and most of the actors and actresses in Hollywood, and many other first-year funds. Now, obviously, when you're incurring those numbers, you can have anybody, first-year investor there. Because I have certain parameters, I will never invest there. I actually said no. The company went bust 6 months later.
Whoa. Okay.
So obviously, there are times in which I'm right, and times in which I'm wrong.
Sure.
I've said no to Pinterest before, and the company was valued 10 billion, and again, practically zero revenues. And I said no, and I was wrong.
Yeah.
So, but this is the name of the game.
Right. Very good. Okay. So just to close, we have a couple of questions here from the people who are online. I lost one of them. It says, Donald from Ivory Coast. He says, I just want to ask a quick idea about risk that the investor has to take before approving a project. So I guess I'm not sure if he's talking about the calculation of the risk or just the feeling that the investor has for the company.
Well, again, the level of risk is always relevant to certain factors. So the ability for the company that you're going to invest in to generate cash and the valuation of the company. So if the company actually is cash flow positive, then obviously the risk is quite low, because you're investing in a company that, most likely in a year or two, the company, unless it wants to grow very aggressively, will not need any more capital. The greatest nightmare that an investor can go into is invest into a company that constantly asks for capital increases and never meets its requirements. So you have to. So the parameters of cash flow generation and valuation are always important, and so you have to. That's the best way to determine the risk.
Excellent. We've got a lot of good questions here, Angelo. So if you don't mind taking, this is, I think, very interesting one. Samson from Ghana asked, I want to know how long during the process of my business, should I continue to follow my business plan?
I think it should continue as long as the greatness of an entrepreneur is to understand as quickly as possible outside changes in terms of scenarios before everybody else. So,
Beautiful, right? Anticipate those, yeah.
yes, if you do have a business plan, follow it, but be ready to change it or modify it.
Right, exactly.
Before everybody else understands it. So the ability for an entrepreneur to advance, changes and be ready for those changes is the essence for success.
Beautiful, beautiful, excellent. So be ready to make those changes. Amin Hassan asks, do you think the number of partners affects the business? He says, we are in our third year of business and we have 7 partners, and it tends to be difficult to work together at times.
It's a good question. Yes, definitely. The more partners there are, the most difficult it is. Again, but it goes back to my previous statement in which the team needs to be cohesive and they're all projected on one objective. If the partners are not focused, then it becomes a huge problem. And I've seen many entrepreneurial stories. Most entrepreneurial stories start from a group of friends.
Yes.
I have an idea in the living room, right. Eating chips, watching a football match. And then because it's the group of friends, they start the company. And let's say there are 5 people, maybe 3 of those 5 are not entrepreneurs. So they get involved in a company, and as time goes by, they have no place in that company. And so it becomes an embarrassment for the 2 real entrepreneurs to kick their friends out.
Yeah.
So that's, with Steve Jobs happened that way.
Yeah. No, yeah.
Partners, and he was a little bit too forceful in doing that. Right. But that's the usual problem with starting a company when you're young.
Yeah, fascinating. One last question, and this is Roland from Chad. So he's working in a very difficult situation. He says, and this says all around the team as well. He says, my question is related to key people to hire within the team. Most of the time, skilled people are very costly, and a young entrepreneur doesn't have the means to satisfy the needs of those people. Are there any other options that you'd have to attract those people?
It's the greatest question for a senior entrepreneur. I actually advise any entrepreneur with a startup not to hire skilled managers that have too much experience in the early stage, because they usually come into the company and they kill it. Why? Because they bring their own past experience and they impose it on people that are younger than them, usually more arrogant. So when I mean skilled managers, you could find a very skilled young guy with relatively little experience. You just have to be good at finding it. There are plenty of young, great entrepreneurs and managers out there, that are hungry. They want to work day and night to produce a successful company. People do not give them the opportunity. So I would go and find those. Within my investment company, I haven't hired, an old banker.
No.
An old advisor from McKinsey. No. I've hired young people.
Hungry people, young, hungry people.
With relatively little experience, but they just want to make it. They have that light in their eyes, and you can see right away that maybe they lack something in terms of experience, but they really want to get there. And those are more precious than anybody else.
Beautiful. And then just let's touch on what you mentioned with Starbucks and Howard Schultz, the idea of giving stock options, skin in the game, a piece of the company. What would you say to an entrepreneur who's thinking of offering that as a carrot to attract those kind of people?
That I think is essential nowadays. Essential. When Howard did it, he was an innovator.
Innovator, right?
He was actually the first guy to give health services to his employees, which was very innovative. But today is a must. I would say. I mean, you have to make everybody that lives inside the company, works inside the company, to feel that they're part of it. Every entrepreneur has to understand that it's not about him, it's about the team. And if he thinks in terms of that, then he's going to be successful.
Dr. Moratti, you've given us a wealth of very, very valuable advice. And I think, we've recorded this. We're going to make it public so that anybody who has not been able to assist will be able to do that. We'll maybe put together, Anke, just a short, written text so that people can read very quickly some of your advice and then go and listen to the interview and hear you directly. So thank you very, very much for this opportunity. Thank you for the great idea of doing these live mentoring sessions, because we're going to continue to do them for the next year. And if you want to say any last parting words to the entrepreneurs, and then we'll close.
Well, I consider a privilege to be able to speak to you guys, and I hope to be in contact with all of you again soon. And I wish you all the best. And you really are the future of the world, because remember that any great country, usually becomes successful because of its great companies. And if you are successful in your companies, you immediately make society.
Make your society, make your country successful.
I thank you for what you're doing.
Beautiful. Thank you, Angelo. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for assisting. E for Impact, thank you. Have a good evening.